Okay. And
Hope everyone is having a good morning. I tried to get to this video yesterday. First, I am your host, Jamarl Thomas. I'm animated about this because I tried to get to this video yesterday. I wanted to get it out the way. I'm your host, Jamarl Thomas. This is Progressive Soapbox. Welcome this morning. It is, might as well say 11 a.m.-ish, give or take 2 minutes. There was an interview that took place between one Cenk Uygur and one Tulsi Gabbard. This interview had the potential to be absolutely awesome. Tulsi Gabbard is a fascinating character to interview because she has a foreign policy that goes firmly against the established order of things, meaning the way we have gone about foreign policy since World War II. Tulsi Gabbard is doing something that to some degree is opposed to that military policy, this, you could say, Cold War policy, this us versus the Soviet Union, and now that the Soviet Union has collapsed, this unipolar version of the world where the United States is sovereign over Earth. She's saying we need to stop these regime change wars, and she's made this a pillar of her presidency. That's why I think she would be a fascinating person to interview. Cenk Uygur, however, uses this interview as I'm going to bring up, it's sandbagging her. He's tackling her. It's like, I'm going to invite you in for an interview and I'm going to ask you every negative thing that somebody has brought up about you and every vote that we didn't particularly like. This was less an interview, less a conversation, and more along the lines, essentially, of a debate. And I'm fascinated by watching this because I've watched other conversations that Cenk Uygur has had where he's buddy-buddy, he's lovey-dovey with the person he's interviewing. I'm going to give one Elizabeth Warren, for example, so you can see the difference in tone in the way that he's talking to one person that part of, this kind of established order that's what pushes a little bit to the left, and a person who's not. The person who I would imagine he loves, based on the way of the interview, there's no, pushing back. She says something that his audience wants to know, and he just moves on because it's uncomfortable for the guest that he's asking. But in this debate, in this conversation, if you want to call it a conversation, he finds every negative thing that he can find about Tulsi Gabbard. This is not about holding the individual accountable. Don't get me wrong, I think you should do that. My point is, throughout the interview, there were times where there were islands where he would let her do the basic toolbox. You're for Medicare for all? Yes. You're for Green New Deal? Well, not for Green New Deal, but I think we need expansive action on climate, and lets the person explain. But the rest of the interview, with that kind of boilerplate that the politician will put out, is engulfed by what is essentially him being negative the entirety of the interview. And also understand what I mean by this. You can find Tulsi Gabbard explaining her transition from being anti-gay to where she is now anywhere. That's on every mainstream source. She said it everywhere. Your audience knows it. The Syria thing, fair enough. The framing of it, fair enough. Like, don't get me wrong, there's some questions that I think, yeah. Totally understand where that's coming from. But think about who you're talking to. You have the potential to ask her things that gets into her philosophy of war and peace. Like, Tulsi Gabbard is making this argument about anti-intervention. Okay, what does that mean? To some degree of detail. Let's go even further into that. Do you believe that your pullback from the United States would invite other countries to expand? Meaning countries that we don't necessarily believe we have a similar interest in. If we pull back, if we become less of an imperial power, do you believe that it would invite other countries to be imperial powers? Do you believe that the United States would be subject to the will of another country, and would this invite somewhat of a conflict in and of itself? Like, God, man, there's so many ways that you could have expanded into this interview. The United States foreign policy that we wouldn't allow no other Soviet unions, meaning no other force that could grow and expand to a degree that could challenge the United States supremacy. Do you believe that that should be true? And if so, are you okay with allowing other forces to expand to that point? Because the United States policy on this, where it's saying no other Soviet unions, that invites us into one conflict after the next because we have to ensure that there are no Soviet unions. And if those countries gain a sufficient amount of strength, then at that point you're talking about a conflict, either economically or militarily, i.e. China and Russia, as they are now, because those countries are sick of being under the will of the U.S., in which case, yes, they're propping up Venezuela, yes, they're propping up Syria, because they realize that at some point it will be them. She's changing this. I guess there's a fascinating conversation to be had with Tulsi Gabbard here. And yes, you hold the politician accountable, but no, you don't necessarily have an interview with the majority of the interviews just negative content. It's just very clear that they're not on her side for this. I'm only going to show certain parts of this because I'm putting an interview below. You can see it for yourself. And by the way, just so we can get a tonal point of view of this, because I want you to be able to see the difference between the various interviews that Cenk Uygur gives the people that he loves and likes versus the people that he doesn't. And I would wager that Tulsi wasn't brought on hip hop for a conservative back and forth, meaning this back and forth where I'm just going to talk about everything critical to you. And I'm just saying why. If you don't like her and you want to make her look bad in front of your audience without necessarily trying to kneecap her in an overt way, then I'm just going to talk about everything bad. Hey, you supported this bill that we didn't particularly like. You used this particular frame, and you were really aggressively anti-gay at one point. Hey, there's a picture of you, and I'm not saying this picture of you is indicative of anything going wrong, but hey, there's a picture of you, and why are you okay taking this picture? The entire interview is that way. With every so often, hey, talk about your boilerplate. Yeah, you like this, you like this. In the last 3 minutes, why are you running for president? I shit you not, the last 3 minutes of the interview, why are you running for president? Which you would think would be the first thing, since that's the reason why she's there for. Take a look at him having a conversation with Elizabeth Warren. I go to this because, God, this is indicative of what I'm talking about. You cease to be a media organization and a propaganda arm for your particular brand of politics. NBC Light.
Tricks, but I'm somewhere in there. Yeah.
Okay. And two, are you proud of that?
Yeah. Why wouldn't I be?
Okay. All right. Great. Well, so you asked some Democratic nominees, and they're not.
I just want to know if I have to settle for second.
Okay. So now, of course, the person most widely considered to be the most progressive senator is Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
So a natural question is, why not back him during the 2016 primaries if you two are the closest aligned in policy?
So look, I think that our primary, I thought was a good thing, and I thought.
Stop right there. Stop right there. You thought our primary was a good thing. Let me get to my point. Your audience, bunch of lefties. Those people loved Sanders. And I would wager that part of the thing that swelled your audience, I don't know if your audience, well, I'm not going to say it that way, but part of the thing that livened and invigorated your audience was the Sanders run. I would imagine this kind of burning headquarters and everything else, I would wager strongly that TYT expanded because of the Sanders thing. It might have retracted after they said vote Clinton, but during the Sanders thing, you must understand that your audience hated what took place in that primary, and specifically did not forgive Elizabeth Warren for not backing Sanders, because all of them considered it to be a political move. Sanders has no chance, Clinton is going to win, and when Clinton wins, I don't want to be on her bad side by not supporting her in the primaries. That seems to be the truth of the matter. Your audience believes that is the truth of the matter, and your audience dislikes what Elizabeth Warren did in that primary. Meaning, nobody left that primary with good feelings. Just saying. Her saying this is disingenuous. You should know this. And if you don't know this, I'm asking why. This gets worse. Let's keep going. Let's go further into it.
It was good that Bernie was out there, that Hillary was out there. They were giving two different visions. They were out there through all the states. I thought it put both energy on our side. I'll tell you something else I thought it did. It made me proud.
That's a tell, by the way. I'll tell you one thing. That's the Clinton finger. When when Bill Clinton was out there saying, I did not have sex, the finger that he used with Monica Lewinsky, that's the Clinton tell. That is not necessarily a good thing when you're starting a speech. If somebody's doing that, when they're telling you something, they are most likely lying to you. Let's let her finish.
Proud to be a Democrat. You know, while the Republicans were doing their clown car thing, you know, with who was going to be voted off the island, and then of course ended up with a reality star as their standard bearer.
That beat your standard bearer. That reality star beat your standard bearer. How are you? Yeah, it was a clown car, and that clown car beat the person who you put up to run in that primary that you thought was just fucking awesome. Let's.
I was proud of what Democrats were out there talking about. I thought it was the right thing to do. And in the end, when it was time, I went out there and fought once it was resolved to try to get Hillary elected. And I would have done the same for Bernie, no doubt about it.
Do you get why some progressives are still mad about that? That Massachusetts was decided by 1.3 points, Iowa was decided by 0.3. That perhaps he could have helped him put him over the top, and then he would have won Iowa, New Hampshire,
Look,
Massachusetts.
And there are people who see it the other way.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I think about it this way: there is nothing the Republicans would love better than for us to stand around and shoot at each other over and relitigate what happened in 2016. I look at what's happening in Washington right now. I look at what Donald Trump wants to do on healthcare and the Republican majority in Congress wants to do.
None of this is an answer. Not the first time around or the second time around. She literally said, I thought what took place in the primaries was a good thing. I don't know anybody who thought that. And then Cenk makes the point of, you know, you can understand why they're saying Iowa, Massachusetts, and there are people who think otherwise. Who thinks the other way? Who thinks the other way? Nobody thinks the other way because it didn't happen. The other way was what took place. Like, understand what we're saying. The other way on that is if she would have backed Sanders and somehow he would have lost all those other. Okay, no, I'm wrong on that. The other way is not what took place, but the other way doesn't really make sense, I don't think. I mean, the thought is Sanders gets a certain momentum as he goes from one place to the next. The other way would have been Sanders got momentum and didn't do anything. It's possible he would have lost. Who's positing that? At the end of this, he just moves on. He just moves on. She goes into an answer and he just moves on. There's no issue, there's no consternation, there's no let me push back on that a little bit because, you know, it seems like this was somewhat of a politically motivated decision that, you know, Hillary Clinton would have won, and that thinking that Hillary Clinton would have won, you didn't want to be on her bad side. Is that more true or not? That's the question that you're asking. That's what you really want to get to the nub of, and that's the question that you don't ask. I have a feeling, though, if that was Tulsi Gabbard, you'd have just asked it in that very specific way. Let's take a look at parts of the Tulsi Gabbard interview. I'm starting this at 46 seconds. Well, 30 seconds. Because that's essentially where all of this starts. Hi, Tulsi. Hi, Cenk. All right, you voted on this. So let's go into it. Let's hear Cenk do his interview with Tulsi Gabbard. I'm only going to show certain parts. I'm going to show his framing argument, because I thought that was actually good back and forth. I thought that was decent. Like I said, my issue is with the rest of the conversation. It's a 30-minute video. You can look at it for yourself. I'm only going to show certain parts. So let's start.
Are not in that competition. Some, like Senator Klobuchar, say, no thanks, right? She's running as a moderate, as a centrist, and everybody's got their own lanes, right? First of all, would you call yourself a progressive? Yeah. Of course, okay. And know the issues that you are progressive in, and if they don't, they should, like Medicare for all, and obviously getting out of the wars, which is really your go-to issue, and or there's an anonymous source saying Bannon loves Tulsi Gabbard, loves her. Fans there. Now that's not your fault. There's nothing you could do about it. But some have concerns about your framing on the war on terror, and you've got some unfortunate fans there. Now that's not your fault. There's nothing you could do about it. But Steve Bannon does like you. He said, or there's an anonymous source saying Bannon loves Tulsi Gabbard, loves her, wants.
There's a deplorable guy that's pretty despicable that likes you. Because, by the way, because associating her with somebody who's considered deplorable to some degree makes her deplorable. let's keep going. And by the way, there is a dovetail to some degree on this idea of non-intervention on the left and the right. So is that obscene that somebody who's on the right may actually say, I like this particular policy of Tulsi Gabbard's? Are they more in line with her, immigration policies or those things? Answer is probably no. But this is the thing that he goes to as one of the very first questions. Let's move on to it, because I want to get into the Syrian thing, because that was a better question. I don't care if Steve Bannon likes Tulsi Gabbard. I don't care. And you're only doing that to associate Bannon with Gabbard. Let's keep going.
Wants to work with her on everything. She would fit perfect, because I'm going to show a clip here and about your thoughts on Islamic extremism. Then I want you to react to your own thoughts and your own positions on it. Let's watch together.
Something happened today where Secretary Kerry made a statement which I think was very evident of the problem that we're seeing, where in a speech she talked about how these Islamic extremists, that they are engaged in, and I quote, criminal conduct rooted in alienation, poverty, thrill-seeking, and other factors. And he went on to say that ultimately this fight will be determined by our success in creating prosperity that's widely shared. This is completely missing the point of exactly this radical Islamic ideology that's fueling these people, and mistakenly, a huge mistake, thinking that somehow, okay, well look, if we give them $10,000 and give them a nice place to live, that somehow they're not going to be engaged in this fighting.
All right, the first obvious question is, do you still believe that?
Yes. The ideology, what my comments there are focusing on is, in order to defeat this threat of terrorism that is not only existing for the American people in the United States, but these terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, who are killing and wreaking havoc on people in other parts of the world. In order to defeat this threat of terrorism, you have to understand the ideology that's driving them. And if you look at terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the ideology that they share comes out of Saudi Arabia. It's this Wahhabi Salafist ideology that basically preaches, unless you follow their perverted brand of Islam, then you must either convert or be killed or enslaved. This ideology is what Saudi Arabia is propagating around the world, spending billions of dollars to spread this ideology, which is creating fertile recruiting grounds for these terrorist groups. So when we talk about defeating the threat of terrorism, it has to be done both militarily and ideologically, defeating this exclusivist ideology that preaches hate against, whether it's Christians or other Muslims or Hindus or Jews or atheists or others, anyone who does not follow this Wahhabi Salafist ideology.
So I think that there's a lot of progressives who agree with you on the threat of Saudi Arabia. Ro Khanna, Ilhan Omar, yourself have done a great job in pointing out the problems with Saudi Arabia and their war in Yemen. So a lot of good progressives on that front. But some good progressives that are in that same camp have an issue with.
Can we stop with the progressive stuff? Like, I find it to be massively manipulative. You have a position or you don't. Who gives a shit about whether or not other people are in it? Like, you come up and you say, I think this is true. And you give your reasons why I think this is true. And the framing of the argument is, hey, there's some lefties that agree with you on that, but there's some lefties that don't. My position is not because I'm trying to be some other lefty. My position is because it's my position. Framing this as, there's some lefties that agree with you on this. Okay, great, but I'm not doing this because other lefties agree. I'm doing it because I think it's right. There's a difference in those things. Continuously framing it as if there's some standard of progressiveness that TYT has plugged itself into. It's fucking nonsense. That word is manipulative. Hillary Clinton believes that she's a progressive. Obama has said at times he's progressive. Everybody on the stage at the DNC conference, when they were trying to choose who they wanted, and they ended up with Tom Perez, everybody on that stage called themselves progressive. So let's stop with the naming thing. You agree with the position or you don't. If you disagree with Tulsi Gabbard's position, just say so. I don't think anything is wrong with this question. And I love, part of me even likes this question because it gets further into her thinking on the war on terror stuff. I disagree with her on this. There is an ideology at work, but let's be clear, that ideology is being powered by factors that are on the ground. Yes, poverty being one of those factors. If if those countries weren't undermined, if they didn't fall apart, let's say from a dictator, and in this case we're talking about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia gets to have more influence in the region by spreading this type of brand. But they're using money to do it. Meaning, you're spreading money around. Hey, here's food, here's some shelter. And then if you toe this line, we will make sure that you have a little bit more resources than you would have under normal circumstances. The United States uses the same thing in Africa in order to buy support among the various nations and to get people to fight in its various clandestine or proxy wars. Same policy is at work from us, or in this case from Saudi Arabia, just in different parts of the world. And it's all using money in order to do it, knowing that if there was a saying, I don't know the guy's name, some plutocrat, but he made this point of saying he could pay half of the poor to kill the other half of the poor. Sounds about right. Let's let him finish.
The framing of radical Islamic extremism, that's a term that the right wing uses, and they're not comfortable with putting Islamic in there because they're worried that it leads to other consequences. So for example, they think it might lead to discrimination, and Donald Trump then did say that he wants a complete and total ban on Muslims overall. And then he asked for extreme vetting of Syrian refugees, which you actually voted for. And so, but correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. So can you see their concern about both the framing of that and the vote on extreme vetting?
What I don't understand is how people who call themselves progressives could somehow stand behind or defend this ideology that Saudi Arabia is spreading and that terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS adhere to. This is the most repressive, harmful, devastating ideology that must be defeated. And this is specifically why I make this distinction between this specific ideology, this Wahhabi Salafist ideology, as distinct from the Muslim, vast majority of Muslims around the world who do not adhere to and who condemn this kind of exclusivist ideology.
Yeah.
It is exactly for this reason, in order to defeat it, we have to understand what it is and to drive that distinction that sets that apart.
Let me be clear to everybody watching, no progressive is in favor of that ideology. It is the right wing of the Muslim world. It is atrocious, no one agrees with it. The question that those folks have is that putting the word Islamic in there seems to unnecessarily bring the whole religion into it. And then let's go to the vote, because there was 47 Democrats that voted with the Trump administration on the extreme vetting of Syrian refugees. You were among them.
This was actually during the Obama administration. This was not during the Trump administration. The Obama administration had come in and spoken to the Democratic caucus prior to this vote taking place, saying that our concerns about this bill is we don't have enough resources to make sure that this vetting that the bill called for occurred. Basically what that bill said is that I believe it was the Department of Homeland Security needs to certify that refugees who are seeking asylum in this country have been vetted. Try to prevent anyone who is seeking to abuse the system from sneaking into our country in that way. That was what was presented to us by members of President Obama's cabinet, and them coming before a committee saying, the problem with this is we just don't have the resources. Why don't we provide you with the resources to make sure that Department of Homeland Security is able to do their job? That was the information that we had going in to that vote. And the reason why I voted the way that I did is because unless our vetting system is doing its job, then we end up harming all refugees who are trying to come into this country. Because if you have, and we have had examples of people who have abused it and used it, and terrorist groups who have come in, or individuals who have come in and started trying to plan attacks here in the homeland. When that happened under the Obama administration, they shut down the entire asylum program, stopping any refugees at all from coming into our country for a period of time. I think it was at least 6 months or so, putting the whole program in question. So that was why I cast that vote. I have supported and put forward requests for appropriations to make sure that we have resources not only going to the Department of Homeland Security, but to make sure that we have the resources there to support our refugee program to continue. because it's important. It's part of the fabric of our country.
First of all, thank you for correcting the record on when the vote was. That's why we have these conversations. But we already have an 18-step vetting process, and that's why the great majority of the Democrats voted in the opposite direction. So they were worried that this was an extra layer on top. So you were not as concerned about that.
It was not an extra layer on top. It was simply saying the Department of Homeland Security needs to certify that this vetting process is doing what it's supposed to do.
Okay, asked and answered.
Didn't hate that question. Personally, I didn't hate that question. Tulsi Gabbard, by definition though, adding an extra step onto it is adding an extra layer on top, just by definition what it is. You had these steps and now you're adding a separate step. If you're looking at a graph, it will be another bubble saying, let's make sure that this process works correctly. Unless they're doing that through the various processes themselves, which you can make an argument is still an extra layer. But we'll ask and answer. Let's keep going. I thought that question was fine. Steve Bannon said this. I'm not that hot on that. In the time it took you to ask that, you could have asked something that was a little bit more interesting. But let's keep going. I want to see where it goes.
So now,
Secretary Kerry's comments were not.
Okay, let's go into the next part because I do want to hear this one. She's talking about John Kerry. Well, you heard John Kerry's point, and you've heard her answer to that, essentially saying she hasn't budged from that position. John Kerry doesn't go with the ideology. In her mind, it's an ideology driving this, not so much on the ground factors, which I don't think I agree with. I mean, both things can be true at the same time. The on the ground factors can fuel what takes place from the standpoint of us. Think about what takes place in America and go back to in situations of times where there was economic stress on society, the number of lynchings increased. This increases there because it's almost as if the frustrations get taken out in the easiest methods or the easiest ways. If the only thing running, or if the only wheels, or if the only car that's moving, or the most available car, let's say it that way, has an ideology attached to it. Like it's not purely just the ideology in itself that just is a thing unto itself. That ideology is being fueled by something. Go further back to Christian missionaries coming to a particular island and spreading around resources. And you can accept these resources providing you accept the ideology that comes with the resources. It's not just by itself. And let her make her point.
Not at all identifying the ideology that is driving these terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And unless and until our leaders do that and understand this threat and our enemy and who they are and why they're doing what they're doing, then there's no way they'll ever be defeated.
right, and so that's why I was saying I love the idea of attacking fundamentalism overall and the radical ideology. The reason I don't attach religions to it because I think it happens all across the world. So
I'm not here to hear your opinion, dude. And I guess they're 10 minutes into this interview, and he's been stick-to-itive on one very particular point. The very next question that probably should have been asked right there is, but what does that mean? How do you face the ideology that you're talking about? I don't really care about Cenk Uygur's perspective on this. I care about hers. How do you go after a particular ideology? Explain that. Are you talking about military might? Are you talking about drone strikes? Are you talking about going in some kind of militaristic impulse? What do you mean when you say confront the ideology? And if that doesn't necessarily mean hitting the underlying reasons for the ideology, how do you confront it at all? How is that not the question? What does she mean when she says that? Like, I don't know what she means when she says that. Do you know what that means?
That interview, the point that I was making is that Secretary Kerry's comments were not at all identifying the ideology that is driving these terrorist groups like ISIS.
Right. How do you go after the ideology? What does that mean? I don't even know if Uygur knows what that means. He only was interested in putting forth his point of view that was in contrast to hers. I am very curious about what that means. Let's let her continue.
is a complicated character, as are a lot of the world.
And trying to pass.
Oh, and by the way, he used this as a proxy to hit her on Modi. It's like he's using that as a proxy to fold into this thing of, well, hey, you were supporting Modi when, you know, Modi was in this particular area where thousands of Muslims were slaughtered, and Modi seemed to stand by and let that take place. I've done videos that kind of made that point known myself, saying I need more information on this very specific point. And she does talk about this. And again, it's not that I hate him asking this question. This is kind of what I mean. It's like, in the context by itself, it's like I can understand the question, but the entire interview is this way, with one or two caveats on like Green New Deal, climate change, that type of stuff, that anybody who even knows who Tulsi Gabbard is already knows that information. You could have dwelled in that a little bit longer. I don't think you needed to. Like I said, there were more interesting questions asked Tulsi Gabbard on. This just seemed like an interview to nail her.
Through the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm
It was in 2002.
I'm concerned about anyone.
Nationalists and extremists attacked Muslims who do it to Muslims in Myanmar. And in 2002 in Gujarat, Hindu nationalists and extremists attacked Muslims, and 2,000 were massacred. Are you concerned about Hindu nationalism being radicalized as it was in 2002?
I'm concerned about anyone who is, in the name of religion, whatever religion that may be, inflicting harm and death and pain upon others in the name of God or in the name of religion.
So right there with you. So you voted no on HR 417 in 2013 that condemned that religious violence in India. So why?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look back and see exactly what resolution you're talking about. If it's the one I think it is, it's because it was a resolution being introduced and trying to pass through the House Foreign Affairs Committee in trying to twist and influence India's elections at that time. I don't believe that the United States should be interfering or intervening in anyone's elections in any other country in the world, and that was the objective of that resolution. It was not denying the kind of religious-based violence that occurs, whether it be in India or in other places.
So Prime Minister Modi is a complicated character, as are a lot of the world leaders, and it's not a black and white issue. And so again, I want to give enough space here to have a nuanced conversation about it. But, and I know a lot of Indian Americans who are big fans of him for other reasons. But
is fully addressed in either of the pieces of legislation in a practical way of implementation.
So what was the thing that tipped?
All right, I'm including the interview at the bottom because I don't want to go through each and every bit of this. For her defense of Modi in this case boiled down to, look, in all of India's criminal courts, they found that he had no culpability. There are people who say that is not true. So this is one of those things you have to make your own judgment based on the information, whether you buy what she's saying or not. They go into this idea of health, Medicare for all, full support, Green New Deal. She doesn't fully support the Green New Deal. The point that she made here is about the federal jobs guarantee, saying that they've seen that in other countries and it hasn't done as well. But from the standpoint of having profound, significant action on climate, she was all in, making this caveat of, but this also requires the help of the rest of the world, because if the United States did everything right tomorrow, you're still kind of in a world of piss. Let's keep going. Like I said, the interview's at the bottom. So you
over that made you think, no, I am ready for this. I think this is the right.
And make that is unacceptable.
So for the Medicare for all, at a certain point, Cenk asked her, "Hey, what made you change your mind?" Now, I don't know if I've heard him ask other people this. It's possible that he's asked other people, so I'm not gonna say that. But this is an extra scrutiny on it. You're for Medicare for all. Were you always for Medicare for all? No, I wasn't. What made you change your mind? Well, I saw that we needed it in the society itself. Essentially, she says she's had her evolution on various issues. Again, you either believe her or you don't. I don't think I have any reason not to believe her on this, but let's keep going. Let's
on their backs.
I want to get to some
that's
other
not
questions.
By transitioning our country to recognize, as we talk about this, that even if we learn more about how it would be implemented, that I don't believe now and haven't for quite some perception. Again,
That was the anti-gay stuff. You were vigorously anti-gay at one point. What made you change your mind about being really anti-gay? Let's keep going.
that was a picture of walking through the hall and saying,
This is a good
generally, that's what happened there and what happened
Picture with Miriam.
in Hawaii, for example, when I ran for Congress, and some of
All right, so one of the things he asked about is gun legislation or gambling legislation. Again, any and everything that came up was, hey, you made this particular vote. Why did you make this vote? Why were you so anti-gay at one point? What made you change your mind about being vigorously anti-gay? You made this vote. You have an association with Modi. Modi is a complicated character. I mean, why are you associated with him when some people say, not the Indian courts that cleared him, but some people say that he was culpable in that? Green New Deal, healthcare, yes. And here's some more bad stuff that our audience is not going to like. And some of our audience is going to be skeptical of you once this information comes out because you don't have a clean slate going from the beginning of your career to the end of the career. Let's keep going.
these legitimate concerns were raised, and I apologize to them for things that I had said in the past, and I will continue to push forth in whatever way I can.
All right, you went to an event where the Adelsons were, Sheldon Adelson, I always get confused if it's Adelson or Adelson. It's only been 10 years that I've been saying the name. And you have a picture with Miriam Adelson, and I'll go with Adelson, and Rabbi Shmuley. Now I know Rabbi Shmuley, and I might have taken a picture with him at some point. He's opposed to me, he's very conservative. And that's a group that is in favor of Israel, but everybody's in favor of Israel. That's not the question. Adelson is very in favor of the very right-wing government of Israel. So not so much about the picture. Anybody can take a picture with anybody.
That's generally, that's what happened there and what happens all the time.
Right, but were you surprised that they gave you a welcome reception, the Adelsons?
I wouldn't say that there was a welcome reception. Again, that was a picture of walking through the hall and saying, hey, let's take a picture. So I think this is a complete mischaracterization going off of a picture in a hallway.
And she's right, it is. Like, when I first watched this interview, I thought to myself, am I being unfair? Like, it feels like this is somewhat of a negative interview. And after watching it again, I realized, I was like, well, yeah, these are gotchas. It's one thing I explained in the beginning when I first started this, but there's something to be said about having an interview where you allow the person to get across their point of view in the interviews, particularly if they're running for president of the United States, and especially if you're calling yourself a lefty network and the person is a lefty. Like, if she was on Fox News and they did this interview, I would understand it because they are ideologically opposed to what Tulsi Gabbard overall is pushing. But she should get the same treatment on a network that's supposed to be a lefty network. Is it a lefty network if you're treating her in this way? Those are questions. Cenk Uygur starts this off by saying, I understand that a picture is not the end of the world. Meaning, I can only read but so much into this picture. So I'm not going to hit you on the picture. But I need to hit you on the picture. That's literally what took place. I'm not going to say this picture means anything. But why did they give you a welcome at? Well, the only way you can go with the welcome at idea is if you're using the picture in order to come to that conclusion. It's like, that's such a hit piece. That's such a hit job. And she did the same thing with Bannon. Well, Uygur did the same thing with Bannon. Hey, I'm not saying that you can, change anything about Bannon. Bannon is Bannon. But, it is about Bannon and he likes you. And I'm making the link between those two things for my audience. There is no link between those two things. It doesn't matter. Uygur is still using it. Let's keep going with this. Let's jump past this. Well, no. Let's go with this. Because he's using this as a proxy to ask what he wants to ask. Which, in my mind, is just ask what you want to ask. Why are you going through these ways? You would only take these pathways if you were trying to ding her in a way that makes her look bad in front of your audience. Hey, there's a picture of you with these extreme, repugnant right-wingers. Why do you have this picture? Well, that's a picture. If you're at an event, people just snap pictures. Okay, I'm not saying there's anything to the picture, but I mean, why did they roll out the welcome mat? The only way you can get this idea that they roll out a welcome mat is the picture, and that's again reading into the picture. It's just a bizarre way of going about things if you weren't trying to ding her.
Okay, so did you talk to Sheldon Adelson? No. See, I went back to Adelson. Okay, so have you ever received a donation from Sheldon Adelson?
No.
And do you know if any PAC supporting you have ever gotten money from him?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, so there's concern that you voted for a bill that would outlaw gambling online, which Adelson is very.
Utah. There are 2 states in this country where gambling is illegal.
This is a question on gambling. The insinuation is you were at this event with Sheldon Adelson. Yes. You took this picture, which means they roll out a welcome mat. No, that's absurd and a mischaracterization. Did you take any money from Adelson? No. Our concern is that you approved a bill for gambling that Adelson was in favor of. This is her explanation. It's not because of the money. In this case, it's because of my state.
Illegal. Hawaii and Utah. So what this bill did was address the fact that there were 2 people who were co-sponsors of that bill. I didn't vote for it. I actually introduced the legislation. It was myself and Jason Chaffetz, who was then a member of Congress representing Utah. There are 2 states in this country where gambling is illegal. Hawaii and Utah. So what this bill did was address the fact that there was a rule change in the Obama administration that dealt with online gambling. Our bill basically said if this change is going to be made, then it should be brought forward through Congress, through legislation, so that we as representatives of our constituents, both of us representing states that have not legalized gambling, can have a debate and actually see whether or not this is a change we want to make. So this was about making sure that Congress maintains our authority and responsibility, and that changes like this that impact our constituents and our states are not made by a bureaucrat in Washington.
So you introduced the resolution, and so did you wind up voting for it or against it?
It was never brought to a vote.
Oh, it never brought to a vote.
Yeah.
I understand. Would you have voted for it?
Of course.
Okay, that makes sense since you introduced it.
Yeah, and like I said, any
What led to that decision?
special access or influence by lobbyists or campaign.
Should we end the occupation in Palestine?
And whose occupation?
The Israeli occupation
This is
of the West Bank
something
and Gaza Strip.
that has to be worked out between Israel and Palestine. I'm not sure what you're saying about we, the United States, taking action.
I'm saying pushing for a 2-state solution, and I would argue aggressively pushing for a 2-state solution.
I think we should do all that we can to help promote peace and security, both for the Palestinian people and the people of Israel. Ultimately, that long ongoing conflict is something that has to be worked out between the leaders of those 2 people and those 2 countries.
But are you opposed to the occupation?
Yes.
Okay.
Go further. That's not. I have no idea what she said on that last answer. I have no idea what that means. We need to do everything that we can to support peace and prosperity between. That's what they've said for the past 50 years. That's been the mantra of pretty much every Democratic president for the last 50 years. I would imagine if you asked Donald Trump, he would probably say something similar. I need to know what that means. Be specific about what that means. Should we consider should we continue to give billions of dollars to Israel? Yay or nay? And if that answer is nay, then how should the United States function within the capacity that we've been functioning? Like, you don't go further into that question. That would be a fascinating thing to go further into. And he doesn't. And it's like, oh, bastard. Go further into that. Go further into that. I want to know more about it. Let's let her keep doing her thing. I want to hear more. But this is a good question. This is not a bad question. I don't know how. This would have been something to dig into. This is kind of what I mean. The time devoted to things that everybody knows versus the time devoted to things that are still unclear with Tulsi Gabbard in regards to the campaign that she's running. Let's let him keep going, though. Let me check one thing first. And all right, yeah, all right. Let's keep going.
So I want to go to one more clip here. It's video 12. This happened during the budget showdown between Trump and the Democrats that just concluded a couple of months ago, and you were on TV, and I wanted to show it and then get your reaction. Okay.
That's interesting though, because you sound like you're not just blaming President Trump on this. You're also blaming Democratic leaders in Congress.
Both sides have completely hardened their positions and are unwilling to come together and work out the differences. And that's the problem here. It's a problem that we see with a lot of issues that come before us in Washington, is an unwillingness to just say, hey, here's my position, here's yours. Let's figure out how we can work out the differences that we can, putting forward the best solution for the American people.
So that's interesting, because I think that some progressives might have concerns about that, because they thought Trump was pretty wrong about.
He was wrong, absolutely wrong.
So do you think the Democrats?
Some Democrats thought that too, Cenk. Some Democrats thought this. God, I hate that. It's like it feels like it's being done for means other than reality, or what reality is. I didn't like Tulsi Gabbard taking that position. I didn't like her taking that position because I was quote unquote progressive. I liked her taking that position because, I hated her taking that position because I thought she was just wrong in that position. It has nothing to do with quote unquote progressiveness. Nobody, at least I don't think people, look at themselves and says, I'm going to be a progressive today and I'm going to do X, Y, Z. They are that way just because they are that way. And they take positions because they take positions. I disagree with her on this. I thought she was completely wrong on this. And I thought she was being entirely political and pushing this particular perspective. Yeah, I guess my issue with this interview, like I've said before, is the continuous, I'm going to name all of the bad shit that you've ever done. When the things that you want to take place, I'm going to leave limited time to get to it. It's not that any specific issue that he's bringing up here is necessarily wrong. It's more so, I ask, why so negative of an interview with somebody like Tulsi Gabbard when other interviews with people that are more chummy and close to the DNC, not so much. MSNBC light. Elizabeth Warren is, progressive light. Let's let him finish.
Some Democrats who took the position politicizing really the real issue at heart, which is border security, and took that extreme position where Trump is saying, I want a wall from sea to shining sea, and others took the position, absolutely no wall whatsoever. Both are missing the point, which is, as a country, we have to have secure borders. Democrats and Republicans in the past have supported certain.
It's so hard to know whether somebody is taking a position for political reasons or whether they're taking a position for real reasons. Both sides were politicizing it, yes. That's because the originating action in this was Donald Trump calling for a border wall that was unnecessary. He was doing it purely for a political campaign or political reasons. He was trying to fulfill a campaign promise to his constituents. There was no real idea there. There was no there to it. Now, whatever I want to think about Democratic Party, at the very least, on something like this, where the public was against Trump on, particularly around the idea of shutting the government down on, they were right. They were right to oppose it. Now, yes, they were politicizing it, but they were politicizing it because they could politicize it because it was that egregious to shut the government down. I would even go so far as to say treasonous. It's Russiagate nonsense. The president of the United States shut the government down because he wanted to get a border wall built that was entirely unnecessary. That's what we're talking about. I understand Tulsi Gabbard's point of view on this, but her point of view is taking this as if this was a real thing. It was never a real thing. It was purely a politicized event. I disagree with her on this. Does this need to be the thing that you bring up? Maybe, I don't know. But again, this is not an issue in and of itself from the standpoint of my perspective of what TYT is doing here. Let's let him
and deal with the heart of the issue.
House Resolution 1737, where NAACP and 24
They were being accused of
Honda and Ally Bank for overcharging borrowers to want to be president. What are your priorities?
my constituents since that time. I think
Now we're getting to the end of the interview. There are 4 minutes left in this interview. And we finally get to the point of him asking, why do you want to be president? I could be wrong on this. This is somewhat of a subjective opinion. And there will be people who look at this who think perfect. There'll be some people who look at this interview and think perfect. I suggest that those people probably dislike Tulsi Gabbard. In the same way that people, when I look at this interview and think it's critical, they would say it's probably because you like Tulsi Gabbard. I put to you and say, think of all the things that could have been asked. Think of all the things that are so redundant that you could just find on mainstream media versus the things, the philosophy of Tulsi Gabbard. What makes Tulsi Gabbard work? What makes her tick? Some of these questions were apt and on point. And I wish he would have further into these questions in order to figure out what she meant. Because he may have an idea in his head of what Tulsi Gabbard means when she says it, but she's not being specific on some of the things. And he could have went further. This was an opportunity for the lefties to figure out what makes her tick, because that's what I'm getting at. And I'm leaving this interview with no clear understanding of it, only Cenk Uygur's points of view. I don't care about Cenk Uygur's points of view, I want hers. The Israel-Palestine thing, because I don't necessarily think she's all that great on Israel. And that should have been something that you pushed into, because if we're talking about, I guess what people would consider lefties, this is an issue they care about. It's an issue they care about deeply. That would have been something to push in on. The Syria thing and the framing of the Islamic thing, personally, I thought that was fascinating. So it's not that I think you can't ask Tulsi Gabbard critical questions. It is. But I don't like gotchas. You're standing beside this guy in a picture. This makes you look like a horrible person. Okay, me standing beside that guy is not necessarily indicative of me being a horrible person. Steve Bannon likes you. I can't control what Steve Bannon likes, and there are things where lefties and right-wingers dovetail on. All right, last 3 minutes. She gets to finally explain why she's running for president in an interview that most of it was supposed to be why she was running for president. And after this, I'll get to the Super Chats and the Streamlabs.
I think their questions were largely resolved, and I voted for those because I think it's important we do address this issue because it is clearly occurring and the CFPB needs to be empowered to do so.
Okay, now you're running for president, so obviously something drives you to want to be president. What are your priorities? Why are you running for president?
Look, I'm a soldier. I'm a major in the Army National Guard, have served there now for almost 15 years, served on 2 deployments to the Middle East, over 6 years in Congress on the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs committees. I know the cost of war, and I'm running for president to bring about an end to these wasteful, counterproductive regime change wars, work to bring about an end to this new Cold War we're seeing with increasing tensions between the United States and other nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, and end this nuclear arms race. These things that are costing us trillions of dollars that are coming out of the pockets of Americans all across this country, dollars that we need to bring back to serve the very real and urgent needs of our people. Things like healthcare for all, things like education, investing in our crumbling infrastructure and rebuilding it, making sure that people have clean water to drink in this country, protecting our environment. The needs are great. This issue of the cost of war is central to our being able to address those challenges. I'm running for president to bring about that sea change in our policy, get our priorities straight, and bring these values and principles of service before self back to the White House so that our White House can be that beacon of light for every single person in this country that it should be.
So a lot of progressives would agree with that. And then just a quick follow-up to that. If we're withdrawing from the wars and we're saving that money and we could spend it at home, would you then reduce the amount of money the Defense Department is getting?
Yes, that would naturally occur. I think in addition to ending these regime change wars and this nuclear arms race, we have to look at how our Department of Defense is spending its money and to accomplish what objectives. We've got troops who are deployed all around the world. We need to look at why that is and how those interests may or may not be serving the interests of our country and the American people. So we've got to do an overhaul and really look at and assess our Department of Defense and adjust the spending levels accordingly.
All right, last question. You're known for not wanting to do wars of regime change. What would be your number 2 priority?
Taking those dollars and investing them here in our people. Getting to the heart of these problems is what's critical, so that we can address that root cause and then be able to solve them. So I listed a number of different priorities. It's hard to say, well, which one is more pressing than the other, because they're all important. In order to be able to take action and fulfill those priorities, we've got to address that issue of the cost of war.
This interview has so much potential. Like right there, you want to change our foreign policy. When Donald Trump tried to moderately change our foreign policy, the intelligence community, the military complex, if you want to call it, flipped out. And in flipping out, it created a situation where it was almost impossible for him to do that. Donald Trump said, we're coming back from Afghanistan and Syria. And across the entire media, they said, oh my God, I can't believe the president of the United States is doing this. Secondly, he's working at the behest of Vladimir Putin, who is controlling him and giving him orders. The goal was to stop him from doing that, and that goal was done by Democrats and Republicans. If that was true for Donald Trump, why don't you think the same will be true for you? When Donald Trump was running in the campaign, and in that campaign, he was talking about, again, being less interventionist with regards to the foreign wars, the intel community dropped information into the public sphere to damage Donald Trump. And maybe it's not necessarily that one-to-one, but I am making the point that part of the reason that Trump was disliked was because of this quote-unquote less hawkishness, if that makes sense. That hasn't necessarily been true for Venezuela, and it hasn't necessarily been for Iran, and nor has it been true from the drone strikes and the civilian casualties that have spiked under Trump through these black wars. But in regards to these kind of overt wars, regardless of what his intentions were, him even saying it caused to freak out. Even saying it caused to freak out. Let's go to the super chats, because I know apparently people have opinions on this. And let's see what those opinions are. All right, so right here. I knew I could count on you to analyze the interview. Thank you. Donate to Tulsi, Craig R. Oh, hell yeah. There's so much news. Like, it's hard to put this across. There's a cacophony of news. And it's not just news from the standpoint of the United States. It's news in Britain. It's news in Italy. It's news in Germany. It's news South America, Venezuela. It's news in Ecuador, especially dealing with the Julian Assange stuff. It's news all over the world. And it's like dealing with news all over the world, there's more of an emphasis in what takes place in the United States. But it gets overwhelming, man. And when I do a show, my shows are not like, I may do like a 10-minute show, but that 10-minute show is usually cut because I've spent 30 minutes with the audience. So it's not as easy to get to each and every piece of news that I want to get to. My Twitter feed has essentially the stuff that I'm looking at that I'm going to go over. People tend to send me articles. There's an article right now from Canada, Justin Trudeau, sent to me by Crozet Islet. Owls. I think it's Owls. Owls or Islet. That I'm definitely going to have to cover because it even touches upon what took place in Libya when oil contracts, were up for grabs, or let's say company contracts were up for grabs after Gaddafi was essentially killed. Like, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Pop reality, yeah, I didn't like how he initially came at her. I didn't either, so it wasn't just me. I watched that and I thought, it's not that any one of these questions is wrong individually, but should each of these questions be asked within the context of the same interview if it crowds out getting to stuff that gets across who she is, not just as a person. Because look, there is no way that you can ask individual each and every policy choice that's going to come up during the time of their presidency. There's stuff that you don't know. You can only go by what is your working guiding principle, and not a bullshit guiding principle, but to try to get at the nub of what is this person really trying to do and accomplish in that office, and can they accomplish those things in that office? Again, not that any individual question was wrong. It's just the entirety of this interview came across as somewhat of an attack piece as opposed to some of the other interviews I've watched him do. Pop reality. I love pessimistic Jamarl. Don't let these motherfuckers get away with anything. Cenk did to Tulsi what mainstream media does to Bernie, condescending. Yeah. Yes, Pop. I agree with you. I agree with you. Anthony Reyes. I'm not here to hear your opinion, dude. Go on. Well, I'm not. If you look back at my old Tulsi videos, I've said that there are some things that Tulsi has pushed that I have questions on that I want to hear it explain. That position hasn't changed. The only way I can hear those opinions, however, is if she does interviews. I expect her to get shit on in mainstream media because her perspective is going contrast to the narrative that mainstream media pushes. Fair enough. She comes across a lefty, supposedly lefty network, and that lefty network does the exact same thing that mainstream media does, with the only caveats of, we like that you're pushing for Green New Deal, and we like that you're pushing for Medicare for all, or modified Green New Deal, and Medicare for all. But this other stuff we don't like, we want to talk about. Fine. Talk about the things you don't like. But give her the space to get across why she's running for president in more than just 4 minutes. And being able to go into that stuff. Like the Israel question was fucking phenomenal. And you should have dived into that question, not from the perspective of, are you being bought because you pushed this particular deal? More so, are you for the occupation of Palestine? Are you a supporter of Israel? The answer, of course, is going to be yes. Do you believe that there needs to be peace in that? And what does that look like? Those are questions that flow directly into it from a policy position. I have questions with regards to how she interacts with Israel and this kind of potential allegiance. In fact, the whole point of bringing up the event was kind of making this point that Sheldon Adelson is an extraordinary right-wing on the standpoint of Israel. How far do you go into that rabbit hole? Like the nub of that question, the nub of that was, what does your support mean? Does that mean continuing to give $38 billion to Israel? And if you're giving $38 billion to Israel, how can you ever have peace in a situation where one side has a dramatic advantage over the other side? If you were Benjamin Netanyahu and you were somewhat immoral in character, you didn't necessarily care about the suffering and the harm that you were inflicting on another civilization that you were occupying. If you had a dramatic advantage, hell, you had fucking nuclear weapons, why negotiate? Why? Continue to steal land and pretend as if the negotiations are ongoing. We can't come to a deal. We can't come to a resolution. Western media will always blame the Palestinians. Why would you negotiate under these circumstances? And how, if you're Tulsi Gabbard, do you assist in making this peace process take place? The question that you ask her doesn't touch that at all. It only hits on the periphery of it. When you had the opportunity to dig down into it, you were too fucking busy giving your own opinion on it. Let's keep going. Tulsi is a very non-interventionist. If the Democrat deep state gives Cenk $20 million, mainstream media hates her, and both oppositions to her love the million indie complex, industrial complex, military industrial complex. Let me read that one more time, Pop. Tulsi is non-interventionist. If Democratic deep state gives Cenk Uygur $20 million, which they did, mainstream media hates her, and both oppositions to her love the military industrial complex. Oh, I see what you mean. Both oppositions love the military industrial complex. Well, this question is always like pressing, right? If TYT goes with the perspective that politicians are bought and the perspectives that they take to some degree fall into the leaning in the direction of the money that's giving them, meaning there's an incentive to lean in a direction. Is the same true here? Katzenberg gets $20 million. Katzenberg is part of, you can say, the Democratic complex of sorts. Does TYT need to lean in the direction of the cash? Like, the arguments flow for one another. Can one Cenk Uygur say no when he's made the contrary argument going back for the last X number of years they've been on air? And you can make an argument that says it's an investment, but let's be honest, if Jeff Bezos invests a ton of money into the Washington Post, is the Washington Post ever going to bite the hands of Jeff Bezos? Just saying. Cenk goes easier on Warren than Tulsi. Who you trust? I like that. Who you trust? DC, please donate to Tulsi 2020. Yes. I'm in that camp that wants Tulsi Gabbard on the debate stage. She's close. She's like 12,000 away, something to that effect, 12 to 14,000 away. So yes, if you get the opportunity, please donate to Tulsi Gabbard, especially if you haven't done it before. It's not that you need to want her to be president. It's that more so that you want her on the debate stage, to put Sanders to the left. That's one point. But also, her non-interventionist ideas need to be able to go up against the Hawks. Let the Hawks make their decision or make their position felt against somebody who's not a Hawk. That's what I want. I don't want 3 Hawks on stage arguing about, what's the best way to get dinner. I want somebody on that stage who's also pushing this kind of Chomsky-esque opinion of, we need to stop these interventionist wars, especially from the standpoint of the American public itself, where America is being hollowed out by the money and the billions that we're spending on military. I want that on the debate stage. If you want that on the debate stage also, and you haven't donated to Tulsi, please donate. Again, it has nothing to do with what you wanting her to be president, more so the argument. Zane Jamerson, Tulsi answer wasn't good. Just saying against your occupation isn't enough. Yes, agreed. We need a president who's not afraid to speak the whole truth on this issue. Agreed. Agreed. That's my point. This is, God, I love my audience. That's my point. That answer should have been dug into further. She's like, yeah, I want a solution to this. That's not enough. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry. I don't know what that means. I have no clue what that means. And it annoys the shit out of me that Cenk Uygur leaves that question without figuring out what that means. It's like the stuff that you're pushing on, any mainstream media network will give it to you. Rob, I no longer support her. She's not in favor of FJG. Her half-ass answer is bullshit. She failed to say government stop funding FJG, and that's why they failed. She's lying or economically illiterate. Fuck her. Oh, wow. Wow. That's pretty strong, Rob. I'll say it again. I no longer support her. She's not in favor. I don't know what federal jobs guarantee. All right, that's what it is. I no longer support her. She's not in favor of a federal jobs guarantee. Yes, she did say that. Her half-ass answer is bullshit. She failed to say government stop funding federal jobs guarantee, and that's why it failed. She's lying or economically illiterate. Oh, I see. That's a good point, Rob. I didn't know that. I did not know that. Kills for a living. Tulsi needs to leak nudes or a sex tape, at least a bikini pic. Damn. You might think she's being sexist. You might think this is being sexist. Yeah, I do think this is being sexist. But in the social climate we're in, it would benefit her. She just seems boring in every interview she does. Fair enough. The sex pic stuff is it's funny, but it is sexist. I've said this before, like when I watch her speeches, she's so calm. Like she's so resolute. And maybe this is one of those meditation things where you meditate every day and, brings you to a sense of balance and but you do not live in an ideal world. Meaning you don't live in a world where people, look, I think balance is a magnificent thing. But what is balance in an area of unbalance? The human beings that are in this situation of unbalance are not going to look at this or even feel about this in a way that's in any way this calm resolve. The energy that you're putting out is not necessarily going to be in tandem with the people who are in the society that they believe has left them behind. They feel that they've been fucked over to some degree. And calm and balance and reserve is not necessarily the feeling that engenders. So I understand where you're coming from on this. There's something to be said about saying, look, our society is this way for this reason, and this is the section or this is the direction we need to go. And people feeling that on a flesh-to-bone level, especially when the person in the ferocity in which they're getting it out mirrors what the individuals are feeling. I think this is why Sanders is such a powerful case in this. Like, I've watched Tulsi's rallies, and I've watched Sanders' rallies. Sanders' rallies are a love fest. And despite them being a love fest, there is a clear enunciation of who's responsible. And this is the direction we need to go to resolve our issues. Tulsi is more calm in this, even though she is getting across her point of view in a way that makes coherent sense. Rob, fair enough on the jobs guarantee stuff. Fair enough. I don't think that's a reason to not have her on the debate stage, but fair enough. I appreciate, the resolve. So don't misunderstand me. I'm not hitting her for this, but there is a tonal difference, and I think how people are feeling versus what she's putting out. And a tonal difference can be a little, it comes across as boring. Fair enough. I've made the same argument, so that's fair. Pop reality, let's be honest, these are corporate wars, not ours. Pop, that is true. That is true going all the way back to, oh God. I mean, when we were talking about the coups that the CIA were doing in South America, there's this book, Blowback, that's amazing. It's Chalmers Johnson, I think he has 2 or 3 books on this, where he goes into these ideas of these foreign regime change wars. And he gets into this section on the CIA where he calls the CIA the president's men. Like, these are the guys that are doing the stuff that the president needs to be done in the shadows, where the president is not supposed to have any hands on. By the same token, the president is still whispering, saying, hey, I need you to go do this. One war after the next in South America were corporate wars. They were regime changing because they wanted to get their hands on the access to those resources in a way that the workers in those countries couldn't organize for themselves in order to push for better wages, wages and pay, same thing, but better conditions. Corporate wars. You're absolutely right. Pop reality, framing matters. Call these wars corporate wars. Yes, Pop, you're right. Andrea Trust, T1T interviews, Cenk sucks, he's obvious sellout. See, I didn't go for him. I wasn't framing it in those terms. I was framing it more in the terms of they don't like Tulsi Gabbard. And for whatever reason, they don't like Tulsi Gabbard. This interview is to some degree a reflection of them not liking Tulsi Gabbard. And I suspect if they did like Tulsi Gabbard, this would have been somewhat of a different interview. Again, I have no issue with them bringing up things that she might have done that they disagree with. My issue here is the issues that I would strongly suggest that his audience cares about. She didn't dig into those. Like, the Syrian thing, fair enough, but when you get into the Israeli conflict stuff, that's a big deal. Like, that's not insignificant. Especially with the killing of Palestinians that has taken place like yesterday. So that's not an insignificant thing to dig into, but you didn't dig into that. And the letter do boilerplate, and then for the last 4 minutes say, okay, why are you running for president? In fact, that question, why are you running for president, her answer leads into damn interesting places. It's like, if they didn't let Trump do it, why do you think they'll let you do it? How do you deal with intelligence services that are against your interests? Like, all of these things. If you pull back from the world, does that mean closing military bases? And if you're closing military bases, that is essentially this imperial project of America that it took on after the Second World War, that this is over with. Do you believe that other countries will essentially fill the spaces that the United States recedes from? And does that position us into a larger conflict later on? These are awesome fucking questions. Like, it gets into Tulsi Gabbard's psychology. It's how she answers these questions explains to you how Tulsi Gabbard is going to respond in a world where the United States recedes, where it pulls back, where it says, look, we're sick of paying all of this money for these military bases. We're sick of being policemen of the world. We're going to do something different. And the jobs program that is the military right now is going to be redirected to end the country itself. That's a profound change. And none of that, little of that, was touched upon in this interview. And mainstream media doesn't touch this because they don't care about it. It's fucking awesome. Nobody is going to ask Tulsi Gabbard those questions. And those are the most profound questions that Tulsi Gabbard could be asked, because that's what Tulsi Gabbard is talking about for the world. Not in a bullshit, just, over the top way. Her saying, I'm going to recede, has profound implications for America. And for that matter, for even what the rest of the world looks like if she partakes on this. None of that was touched on in any of the interviews that I've heard Tulsi Gabbard do, because nobody ever digs into those areas. Just saying, it's aggravating to watch this interview, and it's like you leave the interview thinking, oh, what I wanted to know was not known, and it would never be known. It would go entirely unknown. Those are the things that I want explored. I want that talked about on the debate stage. Like, I don't know, man. This is just fucking aggravating. She could be VP now, then president back-to-back. Paul Gaming. I'm not against that, but I need her on the debate stage for that to even take place. So, no dough job. It's not that you like or trust Tulsi, it's that you don't trust anyone around her. You don't trust the government as a whole. You don't trust that she will have a voice as a woman. I mean, you may be talking to somebody in the chat. I don't distrust. Well, I'll give that. That's interesting. Jamal, capitalists always fight each other for profit. Cenk and Tulsi are no different, fighting for CEOs and market gods, fighting for market gods. Well, that's another interesting question, right? How are you going to, what is your domestic policy and how are you going to affect that domestic policy? Asking what's the first thing on your agenda, I guess that's not bad, but digging into, like for example, if you're trying to pass, anything that you do is going to have a winner and a loser, right? There's no win-wins. That's somewhat utopian. How do you affect Medicare for all against the tidal wave of money that will be used in order to stop you from doing that? Because understand, you're talking about profits. The United States pays twice as much as anyone else in healthcare, and we don't even cover everybody in the country. But that twice as much is profit. That's profit. That's them profiting off of your illnesses and breaks and fractures and surgeries and even just going to the doctor to figure out what the fuck is wrong with you. That's profit. Do you honestly believe that people are not going to fight to retain their profit? They are. How do you, Tulsi Gabbard, plan to get your policy over the finish line? Because I think Medicare for all is going to be a hell of a lift. It's worth doing. A hell of a lift. Brandon Cowley. I really want to. My favorite president, Kennedy, who ran filling a missile gap. He was far from perfect, but they went against him and they killed him. Tulsi even more out front than anti-nuke. JF Kennedy ran on that missile gap thing when it didn't exist. There was no missile gap. The United States had dominance the entire way through that process. Kennedy knew that. He knew that. Did Kennedy know that? Kennedy was running on the missile gap. The United States pushed this notion of a missile gap when they knew that there was no missile gap. And Kennedy attacked Eisenhower for that very specific thing, if I'm not mistaken, saying Eisenhower had fell down on the job and all this other stuff. There was no missile gap. But fair enough, Kennedy. I didn't hate Kennedy either, though. He was going to the goddamn moon. That's one of the best speeches. Marcus Holbert. Tulsi has the best foreign policy agenda because guess what? She's a soldier who goes over there to serve for you. She actually knows what's going on. She's lost friends in war. Fair enough. JJ8KK. You actually think she's too pro-Israel. She opposes regime change, which is Israel's foreign policy strategy. That's why Israel lobby is doing everything it can to defeat her. Duh. Why do you believe AIPAC is doing everything they can to defeat Tulsi Gabbard? Her opposition to foreign wars and wars of intervention, that's assuming she considers Israel's occupation of Palestine an occupation, and damn sure she's probably not considering an intervention. I agree with you. I need to learn more about Tulsi Gabbard on this point, but this is kind of why I'm annoyed with this interview. He could have went further with Tulsi Gabbard on this very point. Clarify. Ni Ing. She supported Bernie in 2016 and has worked with him ever since. She does really have to repeat Bernie's issues. Oh, right. No, that's, yes, boilerplate. And if we're talking about the same thing, it's like she has to say that she's these boilerplate issues as opposed to the more expansive issues. Yes, touch upon you're for Medicare for all, you're for this, you're for this, you're for this. We got those out the way. We agree. Now let's go to the other shit that's fucking phenomenal, based on your presidency and the openness that you allow, or the open space that you allow to have these conversations about anti-war. Jay Parks. Americans can't see good from bad. They are blind to prejudice. Everyone's a bad guy except for me and my religion. This is so stupid, but this is how some think. Yes, that's true. Sometimes it's true. Not everybody. Let's see. Bernie votes with peace action 84%. And Tulsi has a score 50%. Are you serious? Wow. Bernie will be 79 when he enters office. That's old. And I have been a Bernie fan for many years. Being a geriatricist. I know that's not it. Creative experiments. Capitalism is never balanced, Jamal. Who's the idealist now? Oh, I never said capitalism was balanced. I don't have that belief. I mean, the different corporations to some degree is conflict. The basis of it is conflict. I need to get my hands on that resources. I'm fighting to provide a particular product and somebody else can show up on my block. Think of drug dealers and gang wars with the difference being government being involved saying, look, you can't kill the other person, but you need to find any other way to destroy their business. No, I don't have this belief that capitalism is balanced at all. I'm concerned with Tulsi and Sanders. The progressive movement is being split and helps Trump or corporate Democrats. I don't think that. I don't think that. Like, I don't think we're in the midst of a primary. And the goal of this is to clarify who you want, meaning who's the person that you think represents your interest the most. And if that person doesn't get in, is there somebody else that may carry your message in a way that you think is significant enough that says, okay, fair enough? Because the answer may be, nobody else carries my interest. Meaning, I don't get further along with anybody else, any other candidate. And in fact, to some degree, and either way, even backwards, because this person is going to be pushing an agenda that people are okay with, that doesn't get me to where I want to go. If, at some point, if Tulsi drops out, do you believe that support is going to vanish? No, that support is just going to go to Sanders or vice versa. I don't have this thought that this is somewhat of a split, if that makes sense. We can heal our earth, repair our nation, end homelessness, all the good things. Paul Gaming. I agree with you, Paul. I agree with you. A different world is possible. You can't get there with the dinosaurs that's there now. I'm going to end this because we've gone, oh my God, we've gone an hour. I'm going to end this, and I'm going to have to cut this video. I'll probably split it in two, with the last portion being for the patrons. So, if you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you guys in a few. I have several videos for today. Thanks all. And off.